They say the Colorado Rockies don't forgive mistakes, and Caleb Holloway knew that better than anyone. He was a man carved from granite and grief, living on the edge of the world. He sent for a mail-order bride because he needed a partner to survive the brutal winter, a sturdy woman with rough hands, a practical heart, and no delusions about frontier life. But what stepped off the steam train in Silver Creek wasn't a farm girl. It was a mystery wrapped in midnight blue silk and terror, a woman who looked like she'd never held a majestic axe, but definitely knew how to bury a secret. Caleb expected a simple wife. He didn't expect to become the only thing standing between a desperate fugitive and a hangman's noose. The whistle of the Union Pacific steam engine tore through the thin, biting air of Silver Creek, echoing off the canyon walls like a dying scream. Caleb Holloway shifted his weight, his boots sinking an inch into the half-frozen mud of the platform. He was a large man, taking up more space than the polite society of the town usually allowed. His coat was buffalo hide, worn at the elbows, and his beard was trimmed close, revealing a jawline that seemed permanently set in tension. He reached into his breast pocket and touched the crinkled letter for the 100th time that hour. Martha, it was signed. I am strong of back, quiet of nature, and eager to leave the crowded city. I can cook, sew, and tend to livestock. That was what he needed. He didn't need love. He didn't need conversation. He needed someone who could help him haul water when the creek froze and who wouldn't look at the scar running down the left side of his face with pity. He needed a transaction, not a romance. The train hissed to a halt, iron wheels screeching against the rails. Steam billowed out, obscuring the platform in a thick, white fog. Doors clattered open. A few miners stumbled out, coughing, followed by a salesman clutching a carpet bag. And then she appeared. Caleb squinted, stepping forward. The woman descending the iron steps hesitated, her gloved hand gripping the rail so tightly the leather looked white. She was not Martha. Or at least, she couldn't be the Martha who claimed to be strong of back. This woman was slight, willow-thin, buried under a traveling cloak of expensive, midnight blue wool that looked ridiculously out of place against the raw timber of the station. A gust of mountain wind caught her hat, a velvet thing with a ridiculous feather, and she gasped, reaching up to secure it. As the steam cleared, Caleb saw her face. It was pale, the color of fresh cream, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of stormy Atlantic water. But it wasn't her beauty that stopped him cold. It was the fear. She looked like a deer that had heard the snap of a twig, but didn't know where the hunter was standing. She scanned the platform, her gaze darting frantically until it landed on him. She swallowed hard, squared her shoulders, and walked toward him. Her walk wasn't the sturdy stride of a farm girl. It was the gliding, practiced movement of a ballroom floor. Mr. Holloway? Her voice was low, trembling slightly. Caleb didn't take his hat off immediately. He just stared. You're Martha? She flinched at the name, just for a split second, before a mask of composure slid over her face. Yes, Martha. Martha Evans. I hope I'm not late. Caleb looked at her hands. She was wearing kid gloves, delicate and clean. He looked at her trunk, a massive leather-bound chest with brass fittings that looked heavy enough to sink a ship. That's your trunk? He asked, his voice gravelly. Yes. I have a wagon. It's a 3-hour ride up the mountain. It's going to rain. I don't mind the rain, she said, though she shivered as she said it. Caleb didn't move to help her immediately. He was processing the lie. He knew livestock, and he knew weather, and he knew when a deal had gone sour. This woman had never milked a cow in her life. If she had, she'd have worn cotton, not silk. You said in your letter you were sturdy, Caleb said bluntly. She lifted her chin, a spark of defiance flashing in those blue eyes. I am stronger than I look, Mr. Holloway. And I am here, unless you wish to leave me on this platform. It was a challenge. She was betting on his honor. Caleb grunted, a sound of frustration and resignation. He couldn't leave a woman alone in Silver Creek. The town was rough, filled with prospectors who hadn't seen a woman in 6 months and drank whiskey like water. Leaving her here would be feeding her to the wolves. "Wait here," he muttered. He grabbed the heavy trunk with one hand, hoisting it onto his shoulder with a grunt of exertion that made her eyes widen. He marched to the buckboard wagon tied to the hitching post, threw the trunk in the back, and gestured for her to follow. She struggled to climb up the high wheel. Caleb watched her flounder for a moment, realizing with a sinking heart that she didn't even know where to put her foot. He stepped in, placing his large hands on her waist to hoist her up. Under the heavy wool, she felt fragile, like a bird made of hollow bones. She smelled of lavender water and city smoke, nothing like pine or earth. "Thank you," she whispered, arranging her skirts so they wouldn't touch the muddy floorboards. Caleb climbed up beside her, took the reins, and slapped the leather against the backs of the 2 massive draft horses, Jed and Jeremiah. The wagon lurched forward. They left the noise of the town behind, climbing steadily into the tree line. The air grew colder with every mile. The silence between them was heavy, thicker than the impending storm clouds. "It's quiet," she said after an hour, her voice tight. "It's the mountains," Caleb replied, not looking at her. "It's supposed to be quiet." She wrapped her cloak tighter around herself. Is it always this cold in October?" "It's November, ma'am." "And yes, by January the snow will be to the roof line. If you ain't used to the cold, you best get used to it fast." She didn't answer. Caleb side-eyed her. She was staring out at the vast, jagged peaks of the Rockies, her face pale. She didn't look like a woman admiring the view. She looked like a woman measuring the distance between herself and the rest of the world. "Who are you?" Caleb wondered. "And who are you running from? Because people didn't come to the high country looking like that unless they were being chased." The cabin sat in a clearing, surrounded by towering lodgepole pines, their needles dark against the grey sky. It was a sturdy structure, built of hand-hewn logs by Caleb's own hands 5 years ago, right after he'd drifted west to forget the blood of Antietam. It wasn't a hovel, but it wasn't a manor. It was one large room with a stone hearth that dominated the far wall, a sleeping loft above, and a small lean-to kitchen off the back. A braided rug lay in front of the fire, and a rifle hung over the door. Caleb pulled the wagon to a halt. The horses blew air from their nostrils, steam rising in the twilight. "Home," Caleb said flatly. The woman, Martha, or whatever she was, stared at the cabin. She looked terrified. "It's rustic," she managed to say. "It's a cabin," Caleb corrected. He jumped down and helped her descend. Her boots, fine leather with dainty buttons, sank immediately into the slushy snow that had begun to fall. She gasped. "Inside," he commanded. "I have to tend to the horses." She nodded and hurried towards the door, struggling with the latch until it gave way. When Caleb came in 20 minutes later, stomping the snow off his boots, he found her standing in the exact center of the room. She hadn't taken off her cloak. She hadn't lit the lamp. She was just standing there, clutching her reticule bag to her chest. Caleb sighed. He walked past her, striking a match to light the kerosene lamp on the table. The golden light flooded the room, revealing the dust motes dancing in the air and the stark simplicity of his life. "Hungry?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "Good. The letter said you can cook. There's venison in the root cellar, potatoes in the bin, and flour in the jar. Stove's iron. Needs wood." He sat down in his rocking chair and began to unlace his boots, watching her. This was the test. She froze. Her eyes darted to the black cast-iron stove in the corner as if it were a dormant dragon. She moved toward it slowly. She opened the firebox door and stared inside. Then she looked around for wood. There was a pile of kindling next to it. She picked up a piece of wood with 2 fingers, dropped it in, and then looked for a match. She struck one against the box. It snapped. She struck another. It flared and went out. Caleb watched, saying nothing. On the 5th try, she got a fire going, though she used enough kindling to burn the place down. Then came the potatoes. She found a knife, but she held it like a quill pen. She started peeling a potato, gouging out huge chunks of white flesh, wasting half of it. "Stop!" Caleb barked. She dropped the knife, the clatter loud in the silence. The knife is dull." Caleb stood up. He walked over to her, his shadow engulfing her. He took the knife from her hand. It was razor sharp. He'd honed it that morning. He picked up a potato and peeled it in one long, continuous ribbon, the skin falling away paper thin. He slammed the knife into the cutting board. "The knife ain't dull," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And you ain't, Martha." She stepped back, hitting the edge of the table. I am. I wrote you the letter." "You wrote a letter that said you were a farmer's daughter from Ohio. You said you raised 6 brothers. You said you could dress a deer and mend a fence." Caleb stepped closer. "Give me your hands." "What?" "Your hands. Give them to me." Trembling, she held them out. Caleb took them in his own rough, calloused palms. He turned them over. Her palms were soft, unblemished, smooth as river stones. There were no calluses from a hoe, no burn marks from a stove, no needle pricks from sewing canvas. "These are hands that have never done a day's work in their life," Caleb growled. "Who are you?" She tried to pull away, but he held fast, not hurting her, but not letting go. "My name is Lydia," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "Lydia Beaumont." Beaumont. Caleb tested the name. It sounded rich, it sounded southern. "And why are you in my cabin, Lydia Beaumont, pretending to be a farm girl named Martha?" "Because Martha is dead," she blurted out, tears finally spilling over. "She died of fever in the boarding house in St. Louis. I took her letter. I took her ticket." Caleb released her hands as if they burned him. "You stole a dead woman's life?" "I bought it," Lydia cried, her voice rising to a desperate pitch. "I paid for her burial. I gave the landlady everything I had left. I just needed the ticket. I needed to get out. West, where no one would look." "Who is looking for you?" Lydia went pale again, her eyes shutting down. "No one. I needed a fresh start. Please, Mr. Halloway, I can learn. I'm not stupid. I can learn to cook. I can learn to clean. Just don't send me back. Please don't send me back." Caleb looked at her. She was shaking, truly terrified. He thought of the storm howling outside. He thought of the 3-hour ride back to town in the dark. "I ain't sending you back tonight," he grumbled, turning away to finish peeling the potatoes himself. "Not in this weather. But come morning, we're having a talk, and if I catch you lying to me again, I'll drag you to the marshal myself." Lydia sagged against the table, relief washing over her face, though fear still lingered in her eyes. "Thank you," she breathed. "Don't thank me," Caleb said, chopping the potatoes with rhythmic, violent thuds. "You're sleeping in the loft. I'll take the floor. Don't come down until I say so." That night, as the wind battered the cabin walls, Caleb lay on his bedroll by the fire, staring at the beams above. He could hear her soft breathing in the loft. Lydia Beaumont. He knew the name Beaumont. He'd seen it in an old newspaper he'd used to pack insulation a few months back. Something about a scandal in Chicago, or maybe New Orleans. He couldn't remember, but he knew one thing. Trouble had just moved in. And looking at the curve of her shadow against the rafters, he had a sinking feeling that trouble was going to be very hard to let go of. The first week was a disaster of almost comical proportions, if Caleb had been the type of man to find humor in starvation. Lydia, he refused to call her Martha now, burned the biscuits until they were hard as river rocks. She shrank his best wool socks in the wash basin because she used boiling water. She tried to milk the cow, Bessie, from the wrong side, and Bessie kicked the bucket over, soaking Lydia's silk skirt in milk. Caleb watched it all with a simmering patience that surprised even him. He should have taken her back. Every morning, he told himself, today is the day. But then he'd see the bruises under her eyes, the sheer determination in her jaw, as she scrubbed the floor until her knuckles bled, and he'd find an excuse to delay. The pass is snowed in. The wagon wheel needs fixing. The horses are tired. By the second week, the snow had come in earnest. 3 feet of white powder blanketed the valley, sealing them in. "You can't leave now," Caleb said one evening, looking out the frosted window. "Not until the thaw breaks or the crust hardens enough for the sled." Lydia was sitting by the fire, mending one of his shirts. She was getting better at it, though her stitches were still too delicate for the rough flannel. She looked up, the firelight catching the hollows of her cheeks. She had lost weight. "I don't want to leave, Caleb," she said softly. It was the first time she'd used his Christian name. "You don't belong here, Lydia. Look at you. You're fading away." "I'm surviving," she countered. "I made the stew tonight." And it didn't burn. It was edible, he conceded, hiding a small smile. Suddenly a howl pierced the night air. Close. Too close. Caleb's head snapped up. He moved to the window, wiping the frost away. Outside, in the blue moonlight, shadows were moving near the barn. "Wolves!" he cursed. "They smell the cured meat in the shed." He grabbed his rifle from the wall and his heavy coat. "Stay inside. Bar the door behind me." "Caleb, no!" Lydia stood up, dropping the shirt. "It's pitch black. If they get into the barn, they'll kill Bessie and the mules. We lose them. We lose the winter." He slammed the door shut. Lydia rushed to it, dropping the heavy wooden bar into place with trembling hands. She pressed her ear to the wood, listening. She heard Caleb's boots crunching on the snow, then the snarl of a beast. A gunshot cracked the air, loud as a cannon. Then another. Then a scream. A human scream. "Caleb!" Lydia screamed. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She lifted the bar and threw the door open. The cold wind hit her like a physical blow. She saw him 20 yards away, near the wood pile. He was on his knees, swinging the rifle like a club at a massive grey shape that was lunging at him. Lydia looked around frantically. Her eyes landed on the axe leaning against the porch rail. It was heavy. Too heavy for her, but adrenaline is a powerful thing. She grabbed the handle, dragging it through the snow. She ran towards them, her skirts tangling in the deep drifts. "Get back!" Caleb roared, grappling with the wolf. The beast had its jaws clamped on his forearm, the thick buffalo coat the only thing saving his arm from being shredded. Lydia didn't get back. She raised the axe. She couldn't swing it like a lumberjack, but she could drop it. She brought it down with all her weight, the blunt side of the head striking the wolf hard on the spine. The wolf yelped, releasing Caleb and spinning around to snap at her. "Run!" Caleb shouted. He scrambled up, ignoring his arm, and leveled the rifle one-handed. Bang! The wolf dropped, inches from Lydia's hem. Silence rushed back into the clearing, broken only by their ragged breathing. Caleb stared at Lydia. She was standing in the snow, wearing only her indoor dress, clutching the axe handle with white-knuckle force. She was shaking violently, but she hadn't run. "You," Caleb panted, clutching his bleeding arm. "You crazy woman. You could have been killed." Lydia dropped the axe and looked at him, her eyes wide. "You were hurt." Caleb looked at the dead wolf, then back at her. The society girl who was afraid of a potato peeler had just charged a timber wolf to save him. He walked over to her, the snow crunching. He saw the blood dripping from his sleeve, staining the pristine snow red. He saw her shivering uncontrollably. He reached out with his good arm and pulled her against him. It wasn't romantic. It was a necessity of warmth and shock. But as she buried her face in his coat, sobbing dry, terrified tears, Caleb felt something shift in his chest. A wall he'd built 10 years ago developed a hairline fracture. "Come on," he murmured, his voice rougher than usual. "Let's get inside before we both freeze." Back inside, the dynamic had changed. Lydia wasn't the intruder anymore. She was a combatant. She helped him out of his coat. The wolf's teeth had torn through the leather and bitten into the muscle of his left forearm. It was ugly, but not fatal. "I need to stitch it," Caleb said, gritting his teeth as he poured whiskey over the wound. "I'll do it," Lydia said. Her voice was steady now. "You faint at the sight of raw meat, Lydia." "I just watched you kill a wolf, Caleb. I think I can handle a needle." She took the needle and thread, the same kit she'd used to mend his shirt. Her hands, usually so soft, were covered in dried blood and soot. She worked with surprising focus. She bit her lip, her brow furrowed, as she carefully pulled the skin together. Caleb watched her face. She was beautiful, yes, but in the firelight, with blood on her hands and determination in her eyes, she was something else. She was real. "Where did you learn to be brave?" he asked quietly. She paused, the needle hovering over his skin. She didn't look up. "My father," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He was a difficult man, a powerful man. I learned that if you show fear, you get eaten. I forgot that for a while. I remembered it tonight." "Who is he?" Caleb asked. "Your father." Lydia finished the knot and cut the thread. She began bandaging the arm with clean linen strips. "His name is Harrison Beaumont," she said. "He's a railroad tycoon in Chicago, and he didn't send me here. I ran away because he betrothed me to a man named Cornelius Rourke to settle a business debt." Caleb went still. He knew the name Rourke. Everyone in the territories knew Rourke. He was a fixer for the railroads, a man who hired Pinkertons to break strikes and break legs, a man who didn't take no for an answer. "Rourke," Caleb muttered. "That's a dangerous man to run from, Lydia." "I know." She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "He's not a husband, Caleb. He's a monster. He killed his first wife. Everyone whispers it, but no one says it. My father didn't care. He just wanted the merger." She touched his hand, her fingers warm. "If they find me, Rourke won't just take me back. He'll make me pay for running. That's why I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If he comes, if he finds us, don't fight him. Just let me go. He'll kill you if you stand in his way." Caleb looked at the bandage she had just applied. He looked at the axe she had carried into the snow. He stood up, walking to the window to check the locks. He turned back to her, his silhouette dark against the fire. "I reckon," Caleb said slowly, "that I've never been good at doing what I'm told, and I've got a particular dislike for men who think they can own people." He walked back to her and placed his hand on her shoulder. It was heavy, grounding. "You're safe here, Lydia. The snow is deep. No one is coming up that mountain till spring, and by spring, well, we'll see." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Men like Rourke didn't wait for spring. But for tonight, with the fire crackling and the wolf dead in the snow, it was enough. The wolf bite changed everything. For the next month, the deepest, harshest part of the Colorado winter seared the mountain. The snow piled halfway up the cabin windows, sealing them into a twilight world of firelight and shadows. Caleb, a man defined by his physical capability, was suddenly dependent. His left arm swelled angry and red before the inflammation finally subsided, leaving a jagged, purple scar to match the one on his face. The fever that accompanied the infection had burned hot for 3 days, leaving him weak as a kitten. During those dark days, it was Lydia who kept them alive. She was no longer the trembling bird in silk. Necessity had stripped that away, revealing a core of surprising iron. She wore Caleb's spare wool trousers, belted with a rope, her delicate dresses packed away in the trunk that had caused so much trouble. She learned to haul water from the creek, breaking the ice with a sledgehammer, her breath pluming in the sub-zero air. She learned to ration the firewood, feeding the stove just enough to keep them from freezing, but not enough to waste their supply. She learned to cook venison, so it wasn't tough as boot leather, adding dried herbs from Caleb's meager supply to make stews that actually warmed the blood. Caleb watched her from his rocking chair, his arm in a sling, a strange mixture of pride and guilt churning in his gut. "You're ruining your hands," he observed one evening. She was rubbing tallow into her knuckles, which were chapped red and cracking from the cold and hard labor. Lydia looked at her hands. They were rough now, the nails short, calluses forming on the palms. They're useful hands now, Caleb. Before, they were just decorations. He grunted, looking into the fire. This ain't what you signed up for. Nursing a stove-up hermit in a blizzard. And you didn't sign up for a runaway socialite with a bounty on her head, she countered gently. She walked over and knelt by his chair to check the bandage on his arm. Her touch was confident now, no longer hesitant. The proximity did something to the air in the small cabin. It thickened it. When she leaned close, he could smell the faint scent of lavender that still clung to her hair, mixing with the wood smoke. He looked at the curve of her neck, the determined set of her jaw. "Why did you stay out there?" he asked suddenly. "With the wolf, any sane person would have barred the door and hoped for the best." Lydia finished tying off the bandage and sat back on her heels, looking up at him. In the firelight, her Atlantic blue eyes were almost dark grey. "I told you," she said quietly. "I remembered my father's lesson. You don't show fear." That wasn't just not showing fear, Lydia. That was loyalty. You didn't owe me that. A sad smile touched her lips. In Chicago, I was surrounded by people, hundreds of them at parties. But I realized, Caleb, that not one of them would have stepped in front of a carriage for me. Not one. You barely knew me. You knew I was a liar, and yet you went out into the dark to protect my cow, because it's what keeps us alive. You put yourself between me and that beast. She reached out tentatively and touched the old scar on his cheek, the one from the war, a puckered ridge running from his temple to his jaw. He flinched but didn't pull away. "You are a good man, Caleb Halloway. A hard man, but a good one. That's rarer than gold where I come from." Caleb caught her hand, his grip firm. The silence stretched, charged with unspoken things. He hadn't touched a woman with anything like tenderness in 10 years. He'd forgotten how soft skin could feel, even skin roughened by winter work. "Lydia," he said, his voice barely a rumble in his chest. She leaned in just an inch. It was an invitation. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle storybook kiss. It was desperate and clumsy, born of months of isolation and fear and sudden, overwhelming need. He tasted whiskey on his own breath and the salt of tears on hers. She made a small sound in her throat and gripped his shirt, pulling him closer. For a few minutes, the blizzard outside, the threat of Cornelius Rourke, the lies that had brought them together, it all faded. There was just the heat of the fire and the heat of them. When they broke apart, they were both breathless. Lydia laid her head on his good shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. They didn't speak of love. It was too soon, too dangerous a word for their precarious situation. But that night, for the first time, Caleb didn't sleep on the floor. He carried her up the ladder to the loft bed. They slept wrapped in each other's arms under the heavy buffalo robes, seeking comfort against the cold world trying to crush them. It was a cocoon of safety. But cocoons, by their nature, are temporary. March arrived not with a gentle greening, but with a violent thaw. Warm Chinook winds roared over the peaks, melting months of snow in days. The creek turned into a raging torrent of brown mud and ice chunks. The silence of winter was replaced by the chaotic rush of water. The mud around the cabin was thigh-deep. Travel was impossible for 2 weeks. But as the ground began to dry, a new kind of tension settled over the cabin. The isolation was ending. Caleb stood on the porch, testing his healed arm. The muscle was stiff, but the strength was returning. He looked down the winding track that led toward Silver Creek. It was passable now. "I have to go in," he told Lydia over breakfast. The supplies were dangerously low. They were down to the last sack of flour, and he needed salt to cure the spring game. Lydia went still, her coffee cup hovering near her lips. "Is it safe?" "For me? Yes. For you." He didn't finish the sentence. He went to the heavy oak chest at the foot of the bed and pulled out a polished mahogany box. Inside lay a Navy Colt revolver, oiled and lethal. He handed it to her. "It's heavy," she said, her hands trembling slightly as she took it. "It's meant to be. 2 hands, Lydia. Aim for the gut. Don't hesitate. If you see anyone coming up that road that ain't me, you get in the root cellar, you bar the door from the inside, and you wait." He packed the mules, Jed and Jeremiah, taking the buckboard this time. Before he left, he grabbed her shoulders and kissed her hard. 2 days, he promised. "I'll be back in 2 days. Stay hidden." He watched her in the rear view as he drove away, until she was just a small, solitary figure against the towering pines. A knot of dread tightened in his stomach that had nothing to do with the winding mountain road. Silver Creek was a mud pit of activity. Miners were emerging from their claims, hungry for whiskey and poker. The air smelled of wet sawdust, horse manure, and unwashed men. As Caleb loaded sacks of grain onto his buckboard outside the general store, he felt eyes on him. He was used to people staring. His size and his scars usually drew look, but this felt different. It felt predatory. He finished loading and walked to the saloon for a quick shot of whiskey before the long haul back. The moment he pushed through the batwing doors, the conversation at the nearest table died. 2 men sat there. They weren't miners. Their dusters were too new, their hats too clean, their eyes too watchful. They looked like what they were, hired muscle dressed up in city suits. Pinkertons. Or worse, Rourke's private security. One of the men, a fellow with a nose that had been broken more than once, stood up slowly. He held a small, framed photograph in his hand. "Beg pardon, friend," the man said, his voice like dry leaves. "You live up the high pass, don't you? The Halloway cabin?" Caleb didn't move. His hand hovered near the skinning knife at his belt. "I do." The man turned the photograph. It was a studio portrait of a woman in a ball gown. Her hair was elaborately curled, diamonds sparkled at her throat, and her eyes held a profound sadness. It was Lydia. "We're looking for this woman," the man said. "Miss Lydia Beaumont, runaway from Chicago. Valuable property. Her father is very worried. Her fiancé is even more worried." Caleb looked at the picture, then spat on the sawdust floor. "Never seen her. Looks too rich for these parts. She'd freeze to death in a week." And the second man at the table laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "That's what we thought. But we found her trunk down at the station depot. Been sitting there since November. The station master said a giant of a man picked up the owner. A man matching your description, Mr. Halloway." The trap snapped shut. Caleb knew, with chilling certainty, that he had made a fatal error in not burning that cursed trunk the day she arrived. "I picked up a mail-order bride named Martha Evans," Caleb said steadily. "She's at my cabin cooking stew. You got the wrong man and the wrong woman." "Martha Evans died in St. Louis," the first man said, his eyes hardening. "Now, you can tell us where Miss Beaumont is, and there's a $500 reward. Or you can be difficult. Mr. Rourke prefers difficult. He likes to handle those situations personally." Caleb didn't blink. "Like I said, never seen her." He turned to leave. He heard the scrape of a chair. "We'll just have to ride up and pay Mrs. Martha Evans a visit ourselves," the man called out. Caleb stopped. He turned back slowly. The saloon had gone deadly silent. The snow melt turned the upper pass into quicksand, Caleb lied, his voice flat and deadly. "You try to ride a horse up there now, you'll lose the mount, and likely your own neck. Wait a week if you want to live." He stared the man down, until the Pinkerton blinked. "A week," the man muttered. Caleb walked out. He didn't run to his wagon, though every instinct screamed at him to do so. He walked deliberately. He bought an extra box of Winchester rifle shells at the hardware store, making sure the agents saw him do it. He drove out of town slowly. But the second he was around the first bend, out of sight, he whipped the mules into a frenzy. He had bought some time with the lie about the quicksand, maybe a day, maybe 2 if they were cautious. But they were coming. The peaceful interlude of winter was over. The war had just arrived at his doorstep. He drove the mules hard through the night, the wagon careening around cliff-edge turns in the moonlight. He had to get back to her. He had to get back before the vultures decided to test their luck against the mountain. Caleb drove the mules until their chests were heaving with white foam, the wagon wheels skidding dangerously close to the precipice of the switchbacks. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the valley when the cabin finally came into view. It looked peaceful. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. But Caleb knew the peace was an illusion. The men in Silver Creek were trackers. They were paid to be suspicious. They likely hadn't bought his lie about the quicksand for more than an hour. They would be coming, probably at dawn, to catch them sleeping. He reined the mules in hard, jumping from the wagon before it fully stopped. He burst through the door. Lydia was at the table, rolling dough. She looked up, a smile forming on her face that died instantly when she saw his expression. "Pack," Caleb ordered, breathless. "Just the essentials. Ammo, blankets, dried meat." "Caleb?" She wiped the flour from her hands, her heart hammering. "What happened?" "They found the trunk. They know who you are. Rourke sent men." He moved to the gun rack, pulling down a double-barreled shotgun and a box of shells. "We have to move up the ridge. We can't defend the cabin from the low ground. If they surround us here, we burn with the roof." Lydia didn't scream. She didn't cry. She went to the bedroom and grabbed the heavy canvas sack she had prepared weeks ago, during the nights when she couldn't sleep. "How many?" she asked, her voice steady. "2 that I saw. Likely 4 or 5 total. Rourke hires in packs. Is Rourke with them? I don't know." They worked in a frenzied silence. Caleb doused the fire in the stove so the smoke wouldn't give away their position. He turned the horses loose into the woods. They would be safer running free than tied in a barn that might become a bonfire. "Come on," Caleb said, grabbing his Winchester rifle. They hiked up the steep, rocky incline behind the cabin. There was a natural formation up there, a cluster of granite boulders overlooking the clearing, known as Dead Man's Drop, because of the sheer vertical fall on the east side. It offered cover and a clear line of sight to the cabin door. The night was agonizingly long. The temperature dropped, biting through their coats. They lay belly down in the snow between the boulders, waiting. Lydia lay next to him, the heavy Colt revolver gripped in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the dark. "I brought this to your door. You should have left me at the station." Caleb shifted, looking at her profile in the moonlight. "You think I'm here because I have to be. You're a man of honor, Caleb. You wouldn't leave a dog to be kicked, let alone a woman." "It ain't honor, Lydia," he grunted, checking the sight on his rifle for the 10th time. "I've lived alone on this mountain for 5 years. I thought I liked the silence. But these last few months, the silence just feels empty now, without you in it. I ain't fighting for honor. I'm fighting for my wife." Lydia turned to him, eyes wide. They hadn't married. It was a mail-order arrangement that was never solemnized by a preacher. But in the eyes of the mountain, and in the heat of the moment, the title felt realer than any paper. "Husband," she whispered back, a fierce promise in the word. At first light, the enemy arrived. They didn't come sneaking. They rode in boldly, 5 riders on high-stepping thoroughbreds that looked out of place among the pines. They wore long dusters and flat-brimmed hats. Caleb squinted through the scope. The man in the lead wasn't the thug from the bar. He was older, dressed in a tailored suit beneath a fur-lined coat. He sat his horse with the arrogance of a king surveying a conquered village. "Rourke," Lydia breathed, her body stiffening. "He came." "Stay down," Caleb commanded. Down in the clearing, Cornelius Rourke dismounted. He walked to the cabin door and kicked it open. He waited. When no one fired, he signaled his men. They stormed the cabin, guns drawn. Moments later, they emerged, shouting, "Empty, Mr. Rourke! Stove's cold, but not by long!" Rourke turned, scanning the tree line. He took a cigar from his pocket, lit it, and shouted, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Lydia, my dear, this is a lot of effort for a misunderstanding." Lydia trembled, the sound of his voice triggering a visceral panic she thought she had buried. "I know you're up there," Rourke yelled. "And I know you're with the mountain man. Mr. Halloway, is it? I have a proposition. You send her down, unharmed, and I leave you $5,000 in gold on this tree stump. You buy yourself a new life. You keep the girl. Well, I burn everything you own, and then I hunt you for sport." Caleb looked at Lydia. "He thinks you're property. He thinks I'm a seller." "Show him I'm not," Lydia said, her fear hardening into cold anger. Caleb lined up his shot. He wasn't aiming for Rourke. Not yet. If he killed the boss, the hired guns would spray the rocks with lead, and one lucky shot could hit Lydia. He needed to even the odds. Crack! The rifle shot was thunderous. The man standing closest to Rourke spun around, his knee shattered. He screamed, collapsing into the mud. "Take cover!" Rourke roared, diving behind the water trough. The other 3 men scrambled, taking positions behind the woodpile and the corner of the barn. Bullets began to chip away the granite around Caleb and Lydia's heads. "Keep your head down!" Caleb yelled, working the lever of his Winchester. Crack! Crack! He pinned them down, but they were pinned too. It was a stalemate. But Caleb had limited ammo, and they had position on the cabin. Suddenly one of the men made a break for the barn. "He's going for the kerosene," Caleb realized. "They're going to burn us out of the trees." Caleb swung his rifle, but the angle was bad. He couldn't get a clean shot without exposing his entire upper body. "I can't get him," Caleb growled. "I can," Lydia said. She propped the heavy Colt on a flat rock, using both hands to steady the shaking barrel. She took a breath, held it, just like Caleb had taught her with the tin cans. She squeezed the trigger. The gun kicked violently, nearly flying out of her hands. Down by the barn, the man dropped the kerosene tin, clutching his shoulder. He howled in pain. Caleb looked at her, stunned. It was a 50-yard shot with a handgun. A miracle shot. "I aimed for his chest," she admitted breathlessly. "I missed." "You hit enough," Caleb grinned, a wild, dangerous look in his eyes. "Now they know it ain't just me." But the smile faded as he saw smoke rising. The man, though wounded, had managed to kick the lantern over into the spilled kerosene. The dry wood of the barn caught instantly. Flames licked up the side, and the wind was blowing, straight toward the trees where Caleb and Lydia were hiding. "Fire!" Caleb cursed. "We have to move. Back up the slope." They scrambled backward, crawling through the brush as the fire roared to life below, sending a wall of black smoke into the air. "They're flanking us!" Caleb shouted over the roar of the fire. "2 of them moving left." They were being herded, pushed toward the sheer cliff of Dead Man's Drop. Rourke wasn't just a businessman. He was a tactician. He was driving them into a corner. They reached the edge of the cliff. Behind them, a 300-foot drop to the jagged rocks of the riverbed below. In front of them, a wall of smoke and 4 armed men closing in. They were trapped. Caleb pulled Lydia behind the last large boulder. He checked his pockets. 3 bullets left in the rifle, 2 in the shotgun. Lydia had 4 in the Colt. "Lydia," Caleb said, his voice low and urgent. "When they breach the smoke, I'm going to charge them. I'll take as many as I can. You take the path down the goat trail. It's steep, but you can make it." "No," Lydia said, grabbing his arm. "If you charge, you die. I'm not leaving you. There is no other way." "Yes, there is," she said. She looked at the snow above them. A massive drift, heavy and wet from the thaw, hung precariously over the lip of the upper ridge, directly above the path the men were climbing. "The snow," she pointed. Caleb looked up. He understood immediately. An avalanche. But to trigger it, he'd have to shoot the overhang. And if he did that, the snow would come down on everyone, including them, unless they were sheltered perfectly by this boulder. "It's a suicide bet," Caleb said. "Better than Rourke," Lydia replied. Steps crunched in the snow. Voices. "End of the line, Halloway." Rourke's voice cut through the smoke. "Come out! The girl comes with me, and you die quick, or you both die screaming." Caleb looked at Lydia. Her face was smudged with soot, her hair wild, her dress torn. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Do it," she nodded. Caleb stood up. He didn't look at Rourke, who was emerging from the haze 20 yards away, pistol raised. He looked up at the ridgeline. "What are you looking at, mountain man?" Rourke sneered. "The mountain," Caleb said. "She doesn't like trespassers." Caleb raised the Winchester, not at Rourke, but at the sky. "No!" Rourke realized, too late. Bang! The shot hit the sweet spot of the cornice. For a second, nothing happened. Then a low groan, like the earth itself was sighing. A crack appeared in the white facade. "Run!" one of Rourke's men screamed. The white wall detached. Tons of wet, heavy snow cascaded down the chute, a roaring river of white death. Caleb grabbed Lydia, throwing her into the deepest crevice of the rock formation, covering her body with his own massive frame. The world turned white. The roar was deafening, a physical pressure that crushed the air from their lungs. Trees snapped like matchsticks. Men screamed and were silenced instantly. The ground shook, and then silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Caleb moved first. He pushed upward. He was buried, but not deep. The boulder had acted as a prow, splitting the avalanche around them. He punched his hand through the surface and gasped as cold air filled his lungs. He dug Lydia out. She was coughing, blue-lipped, but alive. They climbed out of their hole into a transformed world. The forest was gone. The path was gone. Where Rourke and his men had stood, there was now a smooth, pristine slope of churned snow, leading all the way down to the river. There was no sign of the men, no sign of the horses. The mountain had wiped the slate clean. Caleb scanned the white expanse. Nothing moved. "They're gone," Lydia whispered, shivering violently. Caleb wrapped his arms around her, crushing her to his chest. "It's over." They made their way down slowly, skidding over the debris. They reached the cabin clearing. The barn was a smouldering ruin, but the cabin, shielded by the wind shift caused by the avalanche, stood untouched. Caleb kicked the door open and helped Lydia inside. He lit the fire with shaking hands. He boiled water. He wrapped her in blankets. They sat on the floor by the hearth, exhaustion seeping into their bones. "What now?" Lydia asked after a long time. "They'll send more men. Rourke has lawyers, executors." Caleb shook his head. "Rourke was the head of the snake. Without him, the company will fight over his money. They won't care about a runaway bride. And as far as the world knows, Lydia Beaumont died in an avalanche in the Rockies." He turned to her, taking her face in his hands. "Lydia Beaumont is dead," he said softly. "But I'm hoping Martha Halloway might be willing to stay." Lydia looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the only thing she had saved from her old life, a small locket with a picture of her mother. She looked at it, then tossed it into the fire. "Martha Halloway." She tested the name. She smiled, and this time the fear was gone completely. "I don't know if I can cook, Caleb. I really am terrible at it." Caleb laughed, a rich, deep sound that filled the cabin. "I'll cook. You can handle the shooting." 3 years later. The town of Silver Creek had a legend. They talked about the couple that lived up at Dead Man's Drop. They said the man was a giant who could wrestle a bear, and the woman was a ghost in blue silk who could shoot the wings off a fly at 100 yards. Nobody went up there to bother them. On a crisp autumn morning, Caleb stood on the porch, watching a toddler stumble through the fallen leaves. The boy had his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Lydia stepped out, wiping her hands on an apron. She wasn't wearing silk. She was wearing calico, and her arms were strong, her skin browned by the mountain sun. "Dinner's ready," she called out. "And don't look so surprised, Caleb Halloway. I didn't burn it." Caleb walked up the steps, scooped up his son, and kissed his wife. The mountain man who had expected a simple transaction had ended up with a complicated, dangerous, beautiful life, and looking at the woman who had arrived as a stranger and become his savior, he was, once again, left completely speechless. And that is the legend of Caleb and Lydia, a story that proves that sometimes the wrong person is exactly who you need to survive. Caleb wanted a servant, but he got a warrior. Lydia wanted an escape, but she found a home. In the unforgiving Wild West, love wasn't about flowers and poetry. It was about who would stand next to you when the ammunition ran low and the wolves were at the door. If you enjoyed this gritty tale of romance and survival, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. What would you have done in Lydia's shoes? Would you have run or stood your ground? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next trail.